Hello and welcome to our Gem Pursuit. I'm your host Matthew Weldon and I'm joined here in our studio in Dublin city centre as usual by my trusty co-host Alyce Ketcher. Hello Alyce.
Hello Matthew.
So I hesitated there for a second because Ross wrote rusty co-host in the intro, but it's definitely trusty.
I feel rusty today, to be honest.
Got a very special episode today. You know, when this is released, and obviously you might listen to this at any time, but we are creeping up to St. Patrick's Day, which is obviously one that I've got marked off in bright green in my calendar. So I had to start with some Irish-related topic.
It's going to be for the whole month of March, Matthew. We're celebrating the Irish. We can't just take it for one specific day, Matthew. That's not the way it's going to work. We're not going to go, Happy St. Patrick's Day. This is our only day to celebrate Ireland. It's the month of March. We're doing the whole month. And
it's kind of like your birthday month.
Yeah, exactly. July, everybody. Keep it on tap. It is me. It's all about me in July, but today it's, for March, it's all about Ireland. So we're going to have a whole series of episodes that are going to be celebrating Ireland.
And, you know, today's one is a really important one, a great one to start off with. It is about one of the most important figures in Irish history who can split opinions, I think it's fair to say, but also finishes off with a really interesting piece of jewellery, and we've got some great finds and documentation about this piece of jewellery. So really excited to get started this one. This is one that's quite close to my heart. So let's get going.
That's a long introduction for not telling them what we're actually talking about, Matthew.
Called anticipation.
You're like, this is a very important, it's blah, 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 but you didn't even actually say what we're going to talk about.
By the way, everyone, we're talking about, of course, Michael Collins and his engagement ring to Kitty Kiernan.
And his love story, Matthew, to Kitty Kiernan. But the thing that a lot of Irish people don't understand is that you know who Michael Collins is, but not everybody else in the world necessarily would know who Michael Collins is. So we have to explain, because Matthew's sitting there and he's like, it's of course Michael Collins. And everyone else is like going, huh? Very important person in Irish history, but explain why, Matthew.
There were a lot of people who did are involved in similar things that he did. He was very involved in the struggle for Irish independence, you know, but there were a lot of people who were involved in that struggle, right? And just to preempt this, you know, I do think as an Irish person, you know, we do get caught up in, you know, the independence struggle and that it was so important to our history, but I do think we have to draw a line in the sand at some point and focus on the future, you know. But I would say I was brought up in a household. I'm
going to cut you off because you've just said a million words and none of it has answered my question.
Yeah. It's important to the response, though. It's important to the response.
Come on.
I was brought up in a household where it's portraits of Michael Collins, right? And a lot of Irish people were. But who was he? He was a revolutionary leader, a general in the Irish Republican Army during the War of Independence and subsequent Civil War.
Which was around what time period?
1916 to 1921-22, right? He also was a politician, but the introduction of, you know, widespread newspapers and kind of a slightly more globalized media in the early 1900s and 1920s gave him a platform to become a somewhat mythical figure in terms of almost James Bond-esque, right? Romance, you know, his romance stories, but that's what set him apart. It wasn't just his military prowess, which I think is unquestionable. And my family has a connection to this, which we'll talk about as well.
Okay, I'm going to give a little bit of background because obviously, and I would be the same, there is a lot of emotional attachment to Michael Collins as a figure, right? He is pivotal in actually bringing about something that the Irish people were fighting for so long and were never successful at doing. The reason behind why he was successful is super important. Michael Collins, he's a Cork man. He was He was born in Cork in 1890. His mother and father were farmers. He was the youngest of a large Irish family. And in his family and in his schooling, he has a huge promotion of the Irish culture and a nourishing of the national identity to be an Irish person. So he's brought up amongst this very nationalist ideology surrounding him. His dad is also a part of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which was started in 1858 with the goal of achieving Irish independence from British rule. So this is something that is kind of ingrained in him as a young man. He leaves Ireland for a time when he's 16. He works at a post office in London, but his circles always stay very Irish. He's part of the Gaelic Athletic Association and becomes the president of that.
The GAA.
Exactly. But a lot of people outside of Ireland don't know what the GAA stands for.
True.
So he champions what it means to be Irish. And at this time as well, the Irish language is also receiving a revival. So all of this is happening and it's a kind of a perfect storm. However, 1916 happens, the Easter Rising, and during that particular time, he fights, but they're unsuccessful once again in actually bringing about freedom from British rule. And this is where I think it's a pivotal point before we get onto his love story, right? Because the failure of the Rising and the execution of the leaders, I think, is what really puts a fire under these men and also the nation, because everybody's watching and they're seeing and they're like, no, it's really now or never. We need to break away from this. However, every single generation before them, the way that they tried to fight to gain that independence just did not work. And so a new way of fighting was brought about. And that's what Michael Collins is really famous for.
The piece you mentioned there, Alyce, when he went to London, like he learned a lot there, right? You know, he got very involved in Irish circles there. He learned to understand the Crown's way of thinking a bit as well. So that was important. He was the director of intelligence for the IRA, which was a very different thing back then to it is now, right? It was
the Irish Republican Army.
Right, yeah, in the truest sense of the words,
Yeah.
right? Just before the 1916 Rising, which was a conventional rising against British rule in terms of people took positions, overtook buildings and tried to fight the British Army in a conventional sense, which is impossible, right? So the general sentiment around Dublin at the time of the Rising, most people saw it actually as a nuisance. It disrupted trade, caused a lot of damage. It was actually cancelled a couple of nights before. So, but the message didn't go out to everyone. So not everyone turned up who was supposed to turn up. So there was also a depleted force who did it. Yes, they lost, but the British government, they started to execute all of the leaders of the Rising, but they didn't do it straight away. And this was a big mistake. They drew it out and that gave time for sympathy, and the public started to kind of almost support the leaders because they saw it as like a persecution then. If the British had just executed everyone at the start, probably could still be part of the UK.
No.
I don't think so. But you know, and sorry, it's, you know, I love, you know, we do a lot of business in England, UK. It's a lot of really good friends in there, but it's just the time was different.
I don't think it's about that though. I think it's about the will of the strong will and passion of the Irish to steer their own ship. Like, it's not about in any way at all about me against you or you against me. It's about having the governance over your own future and being able to grow the way that you want to grow. Learn your language, speak your language, read your books, have your history. And who doesn't want that? Any culture in the world is trying to fight the right not to be snuffed out. How do they do it? Well, with Michael Collins, he had a mind where he looked at the situation and he went, we can't fight the same way that the British are fighting because we don't have the same resources that they have. They will beat us every time. They have more guns. They have more soldiers. They have more
generations of training in that type of warfare.
Exactly. So he changes paths on the way in which the Irish are going to gain their own freedom. And he does that through guerrilla warfare. Now, we're not going to get too much into it because it's just the history
Can we get into it a little bit?
We need to get onto his love story.
We do.
But he introduces this particular way of, and I think this is where you think, James Bond more, Matthew, because this is really, number one, the way in which it becomes apparent that the Irish are doing something because it's happening in broad daylight on the streets of Dublin.
You talk about guerrilla warfare. He was credited with kind of coming up with guerrilla warfare as we know it today. He had these things called flying columns, and flying columns were these groups of assassins. And listen, war is murder, to quote a line from the Michael Collins film, which we get to, sheer bloody murder. They're dressed up like regular people in the street. They went after the British intelligence. That's how every movement against the British ultimately failed, is that the intelligence that the British establishment had in Ireland was so good that we couldn't organise anything, right? It was shut down before it began. So Michael Collins identified that he went after the intelligence in Dublin Castle that they would be unable to operate. And the way he did that was with these flying columns. They would accumulate quickly, strike the target, disappear into the street. Gone. Can't find them. But that's what he did during the War of Independence and following the War of Independence when the British came to the table to negotiate, for many reasons, right? They had a lot on their plate, World War One, etc. He also then stepped into the role as a politician, albeit I think he really didn't want to do that, but I think he would do anything for his country.
Which leads us on to the sacrifices, including the love sacrifices that he makes for his country, because he did have a woman that was standing by his side during all of this. And she was a formidable woman. Her name was Catherine Bridget Kiernan, but she was most commonly known as Kitty or Kit. And she was slightly younger than, only by 2 years, than Collins. But she was from County Longford. She was from quite a large family, and they were well off. But her parents both died when she was in her teenage years, which left a huge amount of responsibility on her and her siblings' shoulders, in particular her elder sister. But they had a flair for business. And so Kitty Kiernan and her sisters and their sole brother actually become quite well known for their entrepreneurship in Longford.
You moved to Limerick when you first came to Ireland, am I correct?
Yes.
The thing about every town in Ireland, they have a family like that. Like, they had their hotel, the Greville Arms, but they also had a bar, a bakery, a grocery shop.
And undertakers.
No undertakers. But like in Limerick, I'm sure in the town that you were in, there was one family who probably did everything, right?
Well, that's the way the Irish are, like fabulous business people. People get behind each other as well. If you've opened up a business and people will come and support you. So it's lovely to see that actually hasn't changed too much over the years.
It hasn't.
So they actually meet in 1917 after the Rising. And this is before all of the huge stuff goes down. Michael Collins actually comes up to Longford to support a Longford man who was a participant in the Rising called Joseph McGuinness. And he was running in a by-election to oppose the Irish Party's representative. So Michael Collins obviously was coming up there to kind of, show his support. The McGuinness family, put him up in the hotel that Kitty and her sisters and brother run. And this is how they meet. In particular, the McGuinnesses write, "We found this lovely hotel in Granard. run by 4 beautiful sisters and their brother, and we decided to put Michael there. They were lovely, glamorous girls, and they had all the right ideas. So that kind of shows us that they also were sympathetic to the cause. And that is like kind of our first glimpse into it. However, when Collins does visit the hotel, he's actually staying with his absolute best friend, Harry Boland. And what happens is a love triangle begins between the 3 of them. Harry and Michael both write letters to Kitty, almost as if like they have this kind of competition to win her favor. Harry always writes, "Good night, my sweet love. I will win you against the formidable opponent with which I'm faced," obviously talking about Michael. And then he writes, "Yours ever," and he puts like kiss, 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 kiss under his name. And then Michael obviously writes back to her, knowing that Harry's writing to her, and says, "Harry is back in the morning. Will that entice you to come to town to give that chance to which he's entitled? Have you started to forget me yet? Yours with love, M."
I hope not, he says at the end.
Oh, yeah, I hope not. So it's this interesting love story. But what happens is Kitty writes back, and this is in 1921, and she confesses her love solely for Michael.
Yeah, that letter that Kitty wrote to Michael, you know, she mentions that it's no effort for Harry to be a great lover, as in to love her, which seems to me to indicate that, you know, Harry really was smitten. And even Harry's view was that even if the spark wasn't there 100% between them, which is reading between the lines, maybe what it was, they'd grow to love each other.
Yeah.
Which, you know, can work.
But according to what Kitty says in her letter to Michael, she says, "I am selfish for my own happiness and peace of mind. People tell me that I have no deep feelings, but if it's possible for me to have them, I have them for you." So basically she's saying, I could grow to love someone else. I am a reasonable woman, but I'm unreasonable with you. I have a love for you that I don't necessarily have for anybody else. I have a different type of feeling toward you than I do to anyone else.
She came from a family where her parents died early, and she had to be a leader as well, you know, so she speaks well, and I think it's spot on what she's saying, in particular based on the time that she's living. I mean, the correspondence they have is set to the backdrop of what we talked about at the start. Michael Collins has gone to London to negotiate for Ireland, right? He didn't really want to go. De Valera, who's in charge at the time, realised that the Republic was probably unattainable at these negotiations. So De Valera, and this is what it said, that instead of going himself to bring back the bad news, he sent Collins because he knew that what the people wanted was going to be unattainable.
He was strategic.
Collins goes over. He's negotiating. Kitty's in Granart, in County Longford, in Ireland. They're liaising, and they're almost negotiating their relationship via these letters. It's quite interesting.
It's actually quite comical because they're each telling, they're not great communicators to each other at all. She's basically telling him all of her worries, and then he's writing back to her with all of his worries, and none of them are discussing like how to help each other with their worries. They're basically just bleh on a piece of paper to each other, which is really funny because it's like, we obviously don't know the private conversations that the two of these people have. One thing that Michael always writes is how much pressure is on his back during this time. He feels so much pressure and obligation. And he specifically writes, "It would be so pleasant to be relieved of all responsibility. Yet, while one has the responsibility, it would be cowardly to shirk from standing up to it. The whole business is casting a gloom over me. I cannot help feeling that as a people we are destined to go on dreaming, vainly hoping, striving to no purpose until we are all gone."
God, that's
So he, like, you can hear the amount of pressure that is on this man to try and bring to fruition the hopes and dreams of a nation. It's stifling and also very difficult for a new couple who are trying to wish for a normal life in marriage. But on the 1st of February 1922, the couple do decide to get engaged. And this is where we get some really amazing details of this very, very famous Irish couple's engagement that not a lot of Irish people would know about.
All through the negotiations, they kept writing, and her concerns. He had a team of secretaries. He
had women all around him. Matthew, you're smirking. The thing is, Matthew, is that from a woman's perspective, which only I can give because I'm the only woman sitting at this table, is she's at home. She's looking at newspapers, and in the newspapers she's seen Michael Collins with all of these beautiful women, because obviously he's famous, like, over there, all of these beautiful women surrounding him. And does he look upset about it? I don't think so. He doesn't look upset at all. And his wife to be is at home, and she's like opening up a newspaper and seeing her future husband with all of these beauties around him. Of course she's going to be insecure. Of course she's going to be upset about that.
I totally get that. She wouldn't be human if she didn't think something like that. That would be impossible not to. He was charismatic and he had this appeal for sure, but he was certainly faithful in the traditional sense of the word anyway. I kind of think at that time, though, when he was there, he just must have been laser focused on negotiating the treaty. You can hear in his words there.
There's no proof that he did, and there's no proof that he didn't. So, but the proof in the pudding is that the couple were always heading towards engagement. The two of them were heading towards marriage. Their letters are sure in that both of them wanted to be married to each other. And we're fortunate to do a little bit of research which shows us, number one, Michael Collins' diary of the day of the 1st of February 1922, when he purchases the ring for their engagement. And what's so lovely is Michael Collins' diaries are not like filled with like, "Dear diary, today I sent my assassins out to do XYZ." His diaries are very much a checklist with what is most important for the day and numbered down a page. And his very first, in Roman numerals, important thing of the day was an appointment. It has appointment with Kelly at 12 o'clock, which was an appointment for a jeweler's called J.J. Kelly's or J.J. Kelly in Dublin City. And this is so sweet because we have this in his diary as his number one thing to do for the day. And we also, in the National Libraries in Dublin, or the National Library in Dublin, it has a document of the receipt that was posted to Collins right after the purchase of the engagement ring, which has quite a bit of information on it.
Yeah, and, just on his diary, everything crossed off as well. There was a man who was getting things done. It does say something above, appointment at Kelly's, which is the jewellers that you mentioned. It looks to me like it says something, and it looks like consent.
It could be sisters consent.
Yeah, because she doesn't have parents.
Yeah, she has an older sister. So maybe it was something to do with that. But, a personal diary, you never know. It's the thoughts of somebody who is the only person who can decipher what they were thinking at the time.
Yeah, so J.J. Kelly's, which is an interesting one. The shop is still there, although it's not jewellers anymore. It's Crampton Quay and Asdale Row in Dublin today. It's actually a Starbucks.
Yeah, but it's still got the same facade, which is amazing.
The receipt, right, was posted out to him, right, to Collins. So he obviously attended the appointment, addressed to Mr. Collins Esquire, TD, which stands for Teachtadála, which is Member of Parliament in Irish, which is what we call our members of Parliament. We call them Teachtadálas. And at this point, actually funny and interesting, it's known that my great-grandfather worked in, this is when we started getting into the jewellery business, he worked for 15 years in J.J. Kelly's from about 1915 onwards, right? So
right at this time.
Right at this time, And we also know that he was friendly with Collins. The receipt does have something on it, like a stamp and a signature, but it's over 4 stamps and it's really hard to make out. There definitely does appear to be a W at the start of it. Now, Collins' engagement ring cost £60, right? Now, to give you an insight as well, and this I rang my uncle about this because he did a bit of family history. The house that my grandfather lived in, the next generation, was bought in 1941 in Rathfarnham village on an acre and a half, and it was a 3-story Georgian house. That cost £60 in 1941. This is 1922, and the ring cost £60. So they called Collins the big fella, but he was also a big spender. Right?
We all want a Michael Collins in our lives when we're picking out engagement rings.
You can see it says single stone diamond ring. That's the description. That's the description. Even our entry-level rings have a paragraph, weights, specs, everything. This massive purchase, which must have been, I think in today's money, did we have...
We did, but it doesn't translate over properly because we used the inflation calculator, and it basically said that £60 at the time would have been somewhere around 3 months' wages. But even that, I think it would have been probably more like a year's wages, because the money situation in Ireland was a bit different to the inflation calculator, which was taking it from, I'd say, English pounds.
Totally different. But this was unquestionably a serious spend.
Yeah. So also, it's really important to mention that a single stone diamond ring, this is a classic engagement ring that a lot of people think, the solitaire engagement ring, that it was created by a De Beers promotion that they did in the 50s, where it says diamonds are forever, or a diamond is forever. And this is 1922, and this is a diamond solitaire engagement ring being gifted from one very important person in society to the woman that he's looking to get married to.
And I think, we came across this in our previous episode too, in proposals. Well, De Beers and Tiffany certainly get the credit for popularizing that. This is prima facie evidence that diamond solitaires were also very popular right back in Edwardian and before.
And what's really funny is that as it goes on from here, when Michael is away again during the negotiations, he refers to the diamond ring as his little representative. And he asks Kitty, how is my little representative going when he's away from her? So he has a nickname for the engagement ring.
It wasn't little. It wasn't little, but also, and it's a really good point to know from a jewelry perspective, that one single stone is worth more than many stones that make up the same weight of diamonds. So this was just a single diamond. I'm really interested. I'd love to know what carat weight this stone was. I really would.
I'm really interested in, so obviously very soon after, they were looking actually to they were engaged in February. They were looking to get married in May, because he was still under a lot of obligations with everything to do with the Irish Republic. The wedding couldn't take place in May, and he ultimately is murdered in August. And so during that particular time, Kitty is still preparing for them to be married. But when he does die, his death reaches her and it's still a shock to her. She understands that this is a possibility because obviously it's extremely dangerous what he's doing, and it's touching a lot of nerves, not only within the British and the people that are coming over, the intelligence that's coming over from Britain to try and deal with the situation, but then the Civil War. And so he is under so much danger for his life that ultimately when he is murdered, she's, devastated by it, absolutely devastated by it, because not only has he passed away, but just previous to that, Harry Boland also passes away, or is murdered. So she is losing all of these really important men in her life. I don't know, have you ever done the Glasnevin Cemetery tour, Matthew?
I have, yeah. I did it quite a while ago.
I did it late last year, so just in 2024. It's a great tour. If you're in Dublin and you want to know about Irish history, it's a fabulous, fabulous tour to go on. And those who actually take the tour are so knowledgeable and have wonderful stories about those who are buried there. But you end the tour at Michael Collins's grave, right up the front of the cemetery. And he's buried, and then surrounding him are soldiers. So from the Republican Army. Then there's a pathway, then there's one grave of somebody else, and then next to that grave is Kitty Kiernan's grave. And they say in the tour that she wanted to be buried as close as she could get to Michael Collins.
Kitty did get married subsequently to another person who was in that circle of friends as well. I think it was
Felix Cronin.
Felix Cronin, yeah. And Harry and Michael both lost their lives in the Civil War, and although Kitty got married again to Cronin, she actually named her second child Michael.
Yeah, she named her first son after Felix Cronin. So their first son is Felix Cronin, and their second son is Michael, after Michael Collins. The engagement ring itself, we don't know where it is. We don't know, where it's gone. My thoughts on that would be it's with her. If you were to open up her grave, I would say that ring is in there with her.
Do you think, though, because she was married for a long time after that?
Well, she was married for a long time after that, and she still requested to be buried as close to him. Yes, the ring is still with her, I would say. There's no other evidence that it is anywhere else. Was it sold? I don't think so. Would you sell an engagement ring that was gifted to you by your one true love who was murdered?
Probably be the last thing you'd sell, I'd say.
Exactly. Yeah. You'd do anything to not have that go away. And I think if her husband allows his son to be called Michael, I think he's understanding of the situation.
We're not saying dig up the grave or anything, just anyone listening.
You wouldn't be able to get anywhere near it. There's no way that you'd be able to get near it. And I just want to say, it's really nice to know that although all of this stuff and all of this pressure was going on, that Michael, you did a solid. You got a really nice engagement ring.
There is our first in our season of Irish episodes for the month of March.
Also, the rest of our Irish season is going to be very jewelry focused. But if we're talking about Ireland, we cannot miss out this episode about Michael Collins. It's shaped the nation as we know it today. And so it's really important. It was really important for us to do this particular episode to kind of pave the way on the rest of the Irish episodes for the month of March.
Well, look, what I'd say before we finish up, don't forget to get in touch with us. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, we would really love to hear from you. And I would love to personally see any of those comment suggestions or queries sent in to us. And I read all those emails, and Alyce does as well. So it's at experts@courtville.ie. If you're thinking about something in your mind, will I send it? Won't I send it? Just send it. On that note, this episode was produced by Ross Hannon of Tape Deck with project management and research by Veronique Gauguin and Eftimia Sigudi. And Darcy is helping out with the graphics, and Sarah keeps the wheels turning in the shop, which allows us actually the time to focus on these podcast episodes. So thank you very much to everyone. We will be back with another episode very soon. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed it.
So no thanks to your co-host. Thank you to my great-great-grandfather, James Weldon Sr. Thank you to the sunshine outside. Thank you to Powers Court Townhouse and the security guards.
The dogs on the street.
Chat you all very soon.
Well, it's on a different page and I had scrolled away from it. That's why it actually says it. So I'd like to thank my rustiest co-host. Thank you very much, Alyce. We'll be back very soon on St. Patrick's Day with another very, very special Irish-related episode. Until then, slán go fóill.